And this next panel is a really important conversation about the importance of philosophy at times of war, the purpose of philosophy and thinking as potentially an act of resistance at times where we might feel very powerless. And this is what I love about ZEG. We are in the presence of three philosophers who will thoughtfully guide us through this conversation. So I'd like to welcome them to the stage now. Matthew Pye, Volodymyr Yermolenko, and Vakhtang Kebuladze.
Hello, everybody. So, the first thing to say, I think, is a quote by Adorno that it would be barbaric to do poetry after Auschwitz. And in some ways, I feel very humble to be here with two philosophers from Ukraine, given the visceral and really traumatic events which are taking place there. So a basic modesty in front of something like that. But before we get into the heavy stuff or that kind of thing, let's introduce ourselves. So, Vladimir.
Yes.
Maybe Vladimir II, I think. I know this is always a difficult question for philosophers, but just a biographical description of yourself.
So I'm very proud to be here. It's my third year in a row, and you know, for us Ukrainians, it's going to Georgia is always a great trip, great journey of solidarity. I think we are all, both our peoples are going through a very similar process, but on maybe different levels. I hope you will hear me now better. So let me repeat that for me, it's a great honor. I think. We need to think about it together. We are passing through a horrible war that we didn't start. Russia started this war, but now the dynamics of this war is that we are starting winning this war. And you probably seen the Ukrainian strikes on Moscow yesterday, and the strikes will continue. I always send this message to Georgians that however long and difficult this fight for freedom and democracy, we will win together. And how our major poet Taras Shevchenko said in his poem Caucasus about also Georgians, fight and you will win. This is my message to you.
Vakhtang.
It's very important for me personally to be here because my father was born in Tbilisi, nearby, and my grandfather has built a building in the Takhnishvili Street. I was today morning there, and it's a very important my personal touch here in Tbilisi. I agree with Volodymyr, but I think that our common struggle is deeply rooted in our common history, and we have great connections between Ukraine and Georgia. For example, my favorite Ukrainian poet, Lesya Ukrainka, was many times here in Georgia, and Georgia is the very important topic of her poems. And another poet from Georgia, David Goramishvili, he is buried near Mirgorod, it's in the center of Ukraine, and he wrote his poems about Ukraine. So, as I said, we have huge common history, and I think that the Georgian culture and the Ukrainian culture are deeply interconnected. Yes, and it's a great ground for our common struggle against the Russian Empire, and it's also our common strength. Yeah. That's why it's very important for us, as Volodymyr said, to come to Georgia, and probably 10 or 12 years ago, Georgia was a very important example for us how to make the democratic changes in the country, and it was a great admiration in Ukraine about Georgia. But as Volodymyr said, it's not only about our past, it's also about our common future. Yeah, and I really believe, I do believe, and it's crystal clear for me that our common victory will come soon.
Thank you. So I'm going to start. Thank you for those powerful introductions. But you're very brave to be here after lunch. Philosophy, maybe it's a bit wacky, maybe we're a little bit oddballs, and the challenge is to try and make philosophy relevant. So just to start things off, and briefly introduce myself. I'm a philosophy teacher in Brussels. I teach 17 to 18-year-olds, and I use this image in the first class that I give. And it's a photo taken, hold on, sorry, I just gave it away. So, try and forget that first slide. So here's a picture of some trees. It looks like a children's playground. Yeah, it just looks like random, odd bits of wood. And from the outside, I think philosophy can look like that. These weird thinkers, Hegel, Kant, Nietzsche, etc. And it has no, you're an alien to it. But the funny thing about these trees is, if you look on the left, if you sit in that little stump on the left, something magical happens, and they all line up. So, just sitting there, suddenly you get this coherence, you have an energy, suddenly things like make sense. And in some ways, that's a little bit what the goal of philosophy is. It's to try and provide a view of the world, a viewpoint, where things create an energy or a synergy. And in fact, just to finish this artwork, it's an artwork about religion and how religion works. So this is it's called the Upper Room. And these are the 12 disciples, and the seat that you sit in is Jesus' seat. And it's the difference between looking at a religion from the outside, which looks just random and a bit crazy, and religion from the inside, which has this kind of synergistic energy and coherence and so on. So my question now is, for my students in the classroom, some of them arrive in the classroom as 16-year-olds, and they've already been philosophizing since they were 4, from nightmares or from a divorce or from a death or something like that, and they're trying to process it, but the background work has already been going on. And for some of them, it's the opposite. They arrive in the room like that, confident in the world, and then philosophy just invades them. It attacks, it deconstructs everything. So my question for you is, which way round was it? Did you grow up with philosophy like this, or did it invade you?
My guess is both. Do you hear me? No? Okay. I will try to speak, and maybe sooner or later my voice will get back to you. In my case, it's both, because I'm a son of 2 philosophers in Ukraine, and I would say that it's hereditary philosophy. You know, we kind of are trying to build a dynasty, but it's of course a joke. But it's not a joke for a country like Ukraine. It's interesting to compare with Georgian example, but I always compare it like to Western European example. When you have the heritage in Ukraine, I think thanks to these repetitive practices of cutting the past or amputating the past, amputating the memory, you don't have too much of the heritage. So we all have the impression right now, we are working a lot with Ukrainian culture, that we are archaeologists, but not in the Foucault's term, like Michel Foucault, this metaphor of archaeology, that you have too much of archives, and then you need to kind of structure it and understand how one relates to another. I think our metaphor of archaeology is really digging under the earth, because everything is kind of covered under the earth. So in a way, this building family lines is very interesting. And I have 3 daughters with my wife, and our youngest daughter, who is called Yaroslava, she is saying things like, she's 8 years old. She's saying things like, "So how many writers are there in Ukraine?" We have, well, quite a many. And she says, well, you need to tell them that I'm coming. I will be next. So she's preparing herself as to write, to being a writer, to be a thinker. And she asks such metaphysical questions. So I think she would answer to your question that it comes like nature into her. I remember also being an 8-year-old boy asking a question, what does it mean to be me? What does it mean to have self-consciousness? And I think this is one of the, then I learned from the history of philosophy that it was, if you think like that, you can call yourself Descartes, so, or Immanuel Kant. So you have some, but I didn't know these names, of course. But then I think it's important that this both intuition and culture, accumulation of culture, but now we have this existential moment in Ukraine that we're rethinking so many philosophical ideas, and I think it's also our task. Like, it's strange enough that during such existential, such very tragic, such very difficult moments, you're actually thinking. You go into the sources of culture. You go into the sources of thinking itself. And my metaphor is that all culture starts with meeting the horrible. All culture starts with meeting our mortality, our death. Like, think about Iliad, think about ancient Greek tragics, etc. And
Sartre said that the French were never as free as under the Nazis,
yeah,
which could be terribly misunderstood, but that's exactly what he meant, that under the pressure of suffering.
Our attitude to Sartre, by the way, is very, mostly quite skeptical, but I will tell you another phrase of Sartre that we kind of twist upside down, because we travel a lot to the destroyed villages in Ukraine. We travel, by the way, one thing that you need to know about us is that we are not only philosophers who are thinking in Kyiv, we're traveling all the time to frontline areas, we're helping our army, we're driving cars to our soldiers, we go into very close places, to very dangerous places, we were many times under risk to life, but when we enter, for example, the villages where you have 2,000 people living and we find 5, we know that there are 5 people, but we find 1, then you understand that this phrase by Sartre, famous phrase, l'enfer c'est les autres, the hell is the others. It should, well, regardless of the size, what he meant by this, but we should twist it upside down. L'enfer c'est l'absence des autres. Like, the hell is the absence of the others. The hell is our solitude, and the others, society, solidarity, is something that makes us human. So there are many things that we rethink, and I'm myself thinking about myself, because usually, philosophy is like when I'm telling somebody that I'm a philosopher and that I'm a Ukrainian philosopher, people are very much surprised because they never met a philosopher, let alone Ukrainian philosopher. But usually they ask, so what philosophy are you specializing in? I'm saying I'm specializing in thinking, I'm specializing in philosophy. So I think this idea that you can work with the tradition, with thinking, and speak on the same level, Heidegger, Plato, Kant, criticize them when needed, agree with them when they needed, because they talk about, experience that you rethink yourself. I think that's the very important thing.
Thank you. Vakhtang, bottom up, top down.
Oh, probably, as Volodymyr said, it's okay with the sound? No? Guys? Oh, yes, now, good. Good? Yeah?
Vakhtang is also a singer, so if you don't hear him, he will sing.
Okay. I think the both directions, yeah, and another one notion, very important notion for our political, for our moral life, and for philosophy as well. Solidarity, yeah, of course, democracy, but probably freedom. Yeah, freedom has a political dimension, and the main slogan of our Maidan, revolution of dignity. Dignity, another one very important notion for us, for the free people, for the really free people, because if you're free, you have dignity. If you have dignity, you are free. So the main slogan of our revolution in 2013, 2014 was "Freedom is our religion." Yeah, and I think that freedom is not only very important political notion, but it's the philosophical moral notion. Freedom has moral dimension and also epistemological dimension. You cannot be philosopher, you cannot be a scholar without freedom of thinking, without freedom of speech. Yeah? And what about my inception, my first step in philosophy? It is connected also with Tbilisi, I will say. Yeah, I was 17 years old in 1889, and in this year, in spring, at the beginning of the year, there was a demonstration here in Tbilisi, one of the first big demonstration against Soviet regime, and this demonstration was terribly suppressed by the Soviet power with the center in Moscow. And it was the first time, as I try to think about this situation of freedom, yeah, freedom of thinking, freedom of action, yeah, how it's possible to be free in a big prison, and for me Soviet Union was a big prison, yeah, and it was in this year I decided to be a philosopher, and now I recover this situation, and I think that this experience, this Tbilisi experience, the experience of this demonstration and this suppression was very important for me to choose my way in life, to understand that the freedom is one of the main value of human being or the human life, and probably for me it's one of the main philosophical notion.
And freedom, of course, has always got these two aspects to it, in that I could describe in a classroom to students different conceptions of freedom, like Sartre's or whatever, but it doesn't matter how smart you are, you have to have an emotional openness, you have to have the heart to allow these ideas to interrogate you, and that takes a bravery and takes a courage, which takes me to the next question. You can think about this whilst we watch a little video clip. So I'm going to play you one of the most famous bits of film. It's a clip from The Matrix. It's a 1 minute clip, and as you watch it, I want to ask whether war and violence changed or shifted your worldview, or whether it confirmed it. So you can have a think about that, and we can all think about that with this.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window, or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? Well, is that you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself.
And of course, it makes me feel old when the students don't know what the Matrix is. It was like in 1999, like, no, but everybody has to know what the Matrix is. It's crazy. So if we describe philosophy as a grammar, so as I'm speaking to you now, I don't think about the grammar of what I'm saying. I'm just fishing out vocabulary. And in fact, growing up in the 70s and 80s in the UK, I was never taught grammar explicitly, but I didn't need to be taught it. I just inherited grammar by being born into a family which talked English, and I watched English TV, etc. So philosophy in some ways is an attempt, I think, to bring the grammar to the surface. Like, what are the background assumptions, what are the governing principles of our thought, what are the governing laws that are in play with everything. So in a way, like in the clip in The Matrix, you can't be taught it. I think if somebody tried to teach me grammar when I was 4 years old, I would just get completely confused about what a pronoun is. So to take it to war then, does war illuminate for you some background principles which you had arrived at already? Or did the war shake you up and make you, let's say, see the Matrix or see these principles at work in a way which was fresh, a way which was new?
I think that in a way we didn't enter the war in 2022. We entered the war much earlier in 2014. And frankly speaking, we entered the thinking about the war from the Russian invasion of Georgia in 2008. That was, I remember this shaking experience when my friend told me that in August 2008, when the Russia invaded Georgia. We immediately understood what does it mean. That it means, tragic future for Georgia, but it means also tragic futures for Ukraine. Therefore, for example, we were kind of preparing for that. I would not say that 2022 was an existential shock. But in a way, of course, the war changes a lot, and the war also changes your understanding of freedom. For example, in this clip, you are kind of proposed a choice. Neo is proposed a choice. But we are making choices every day. And I remember very well this matrix metaphor in a different way. When I first went to Western European capital, to Paris, in, I don't know, it was summer 22 or September 22. And I was going in Paris. It's a wonderful city, one of my favorite cities, because I studied there and I defended my PhD there. It's kind of my second native city. I was going through and I was saying, okay, it's a matrix. The reality is in Ukraine. The reality is the reality of suffering. The reality is bombardments. And this is just an illusion. This is just decorations. So it's kind of, it changes your understanding of reality. And that's very interesting, because I wrote in 2022 that the war doesn't give you a perception of multiple realities, like this Baroque Leibnizian notion of plurality of possible worlds. And frankly speaking, my work on myself is to go and try to come back to the notion that there are multiple worlds, because we will not be able to understand the world around us and persuade the world around us, when we don't understand how, for example, other countries function. But coming back to freedom, I think that, for example, I rethought very much this concept of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. I think I think that the concept of freedom of speech is very important, but also very illusionary, because it comes from the hypothesis that speech exists like an abstract notion, and that people who are speaking exist. But we are facing a reality that people who are speaking are being killed. So the first value for freedom is actually life. You need to ensure life. You need to ensure freedom of action, and not only of speech. And by the way, it's very interesting how in our literature, and in studying totalitarian literature, studying totalitarian practices, you understand that the empire, the tyranny, wants to take away not only your freedom of speech, but, for example, your freedom of action, and even your freedom of movement, even your space. Like, think about many examples how dissidents in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Poland, and other countries describe how empire takes their space from them, how it doesn't allow themselves to. And when Russians invaded Ukraine, we see that those practices in some of the villages, when the people were sent to the underground and didn't have a space for themselves, and spent 1 month having half a square meter for themselves, And another thing that I was thinking about freedom is that freedom is always connected to unfreedom. And you probably know this concept of unfreedom, which which is promoted by Tim Snyder, and I think he also thinks about Eastern European experience, because in Ukrainian language you have a specific word for that. You have the word nevola, and you can, and I think you can only be totally free when you keep this possibility, when you understand this possibility of being unfree, when you remember that, or when you understand the risk. And I think in many Western democracies, people lost their freedoms. People took freedom for granted. So I have this metaphor that freedom is like a muscle. You like a muscle. You need to train it. You need to go to the gym, you know, to train your freedom. And you always need to remember this background of being unfree. And the last thing about freedom, again, I think we understood also during the war that freedom does not necessarily mean doing whatever you want. Freedom means a capacity to choose a value. Here Neo chooses a certain value, and then he becomes kind of a prisoner of this choice, you can say. Some people can say. Because if you choose some value, then, meaning there's something that is bigger than yourself, than your individual life, then of course you limit yourself in many other ways to implement this value. And I think this is very important, how freedom connects to duty, not to rights. And this is, of course, Kantian perspective to think about, like, philosophical culture. I feel like,
Yeah. Do I hear it? No?
For the
Yes.
war.
Yeah, for the war. So, about the war, two main questions for me. First one, did I ever want this experience? No, absolutely no. And the second question, can I live without this experience? Absolutely no. So it is very paradoxical situation, yeah? I didn't want this experience, but I cannot live without this experience, yeah? So, and sure, this war, and I don't know the real start of this war. Probably for Ukraine, it was always the war with Russia. Our nation, our political nation, is formed by this war, by this eternal war with Russian Empire, and it changed us absolutely. I agree with Volodymyr that, and I say I cannot live without this experience, and it changed the topic of our thinking. For example, I'm writing now the book about philosophical anthropology, a philosophical theory of human being, and I started to write this book before the invasion, full-scale invasion, and I didn't think before this invasion that I should write about the philosophy of war in this book. And now I understand that I cannot write this book to the end without this topic, and I'm writing now the article eternal peace or never-ended war. Yeah, I try to compare the position of Kant and Hegel, and I don't know. Probably without this experience, I wouldn't write this article and this part of my book. But I would say that war changed not only the topic, the object of our thinking, of our investigation and our researches, but also the style of our thinking. Yeah, and it changed also our attitude to our own country and to our own nation. Yeah, I feel now, and probably you agree with me, that I feel now the whole territory of Ukraine as my own body. Right. And I feel pain when I hear about the terrible situation in eastern Ukraine or in south of our country. I am living in Kiev, in the capital of the north, but I feel pain, yeah? And it's like a big social body. And probably it's a great difference between us and our enemy. So this is very important influence of the war, of our life experience, yeah, and probably It's terrible to see, but we need this war to feel our nation like a big social body there. And at the same time, another terrible thought came to me, that the war is terrible but very good psychotherapeutic. Why? What the real meaning of psychotherapy? If you come to psychotherapist with your problems, and this doctor, this therapist, help you to solve these problems, he is very bad. Yeah. The main goal of real therapy to show you the real problems of your life, and you should understand that you should live with these problems and you should solve these problems every day. And probably some other problems, they are not important for you at all. And as for me personally, the war is the psychotherapeutic in this meaning. Yeah. After the full-scale invasion, I realized that many of my personal problems are not the problems at all. Yeah. And I find, for me personally, I find the real problems of my life. And I realized that I will solve these problems during all my life. So it's very contradictional influence, and it's very important for the topic of our thinking and for the style of our thinking and of our life as well.
I would add to this an aphorism. So we have a practice that you need to start several seconds to speak, and then you start speaking. The aphorism is that bad philosophy is giving you answers to all your questions, and good philosophy is giving you questions to all your answers.
Yeah. And the history of philosophy, isn't it? It started off as an exercise in trying to get to the truth, and it ran into a wall with Nietzsche, but of course precedents, but in 1900, and then it became essentially therapeutic, just trying to put words on things. And this takes us to the last clip. So I have a clip here to introduce a female philosopher, given that we're three blokes here. And Hannah Arendt was confronted in 1961 with the formidable problem of Adolf Eichmann, and she was criticized very heavily for trying to analyze the Holocaust, to try and put words on the Holocaust, as if it wasn't appropriate to do analysis, because the suffering was just so raw that almost, as I started the session with a quote from Adorno, that it's barbaric to do poetry after Auschwitz. Like, some things is just a sacred space that you shouldn't try and analyze. But Arendt's point here is that thoughtlessness is the problem, and we need to be thoughtful. So this is an AI generated clip, so I just confess that, but it's a very beautiful condensation of Arendt's ideas. So I just play for 2 minutes. Oops, sorry.
1961, I traveled to observe the public proceedings involving Adolf Eichmann for a magazine assignment. Eichmann had been the official responsible for the complex logistics of transport during the conflict. He had been located in Argentina, brought to the region, and placed on the public stage to answer for his administrative role. I went, I confess, expecting to see a fanatic. That is what everyone expected. The presenters expected it. The audience expected it. A person burning with ideological hostility. That is the kind of figure we know how to recognize. That is the kind of behavior that makes sense to us. What I found in that glass booth was something far more disturbing. A middle-aged, ordinary individual with nearsighted eyes and clumsy speech. A former salesman who had joined a powerful bureaucracy and risen to prominence not through personal malice, hatred, or cruelty, through diligence, through obedience, through a remarkable, terrifying inability to think for himself. 6 psychiatrists certified him as normal. One of them remarked, and I find this almost funny, that Eichmann was more normal than I am after having examined him. His attitude toward his family was described as not only normal, but most desirable. The minister who visited him in prison declared him a man of very positive ideas, and this was the man who sent millions to their deaths. The longer I listened to him, the more obvious it became. Eichmann was not stupid. That is not the point. He was simply, genuinely, completely incapable of thinking from the standpoint of anyone else. He spoke exclusively in clichés, in what he himself called officialisi. When he tried to construct a sentence of his own, he would repeat it until it too became a cliché. He was surrounded as if by armor, by stock phrases that insulated him entirely from reality.
And like all great philosophy, there's many resonant ways you can think about our modern situation and what Hannah Arendt is saying now. So my final question is, sometimes it's good to stop thinking. Yeah, you go to a beach or you watch football, or sometimes we have to stop thinking. We have to pause. We have to be ourselves. We have to be in the moment. But yeah, I suppose if you ask the Buddha, then he would have. However, our modern society seems to be afflicted by the fact that we don't think enough, and we have entered into this banality. And philosophy and philosophers, especially in England, they're pushed to at least the French respect their philosophers, but philosophy and this critical approach to the world has been squashed by social media, by AI, by so how do we keep our thoughts alive? How do we stay awake? And yeah, that's my final question, and then I'll open it up for the audience. How do we keep thinking?
So first of all, I don't think, let me refer to a few points. I don't think that writing poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. I don't think that writing poetry after Bucha is barbaric. I think the contrary in Ukrainian culture now shows that you have to write poetry, and Ukrainian poetry is extremely strong today. Why you have to do it? Because you need to save both crimes and heroic deeds and suffering and compassion from oblivion. And this is all about culture. I think that Greek tragedy would not be born without, or let's say Shakespeare tragedies, many other aspects of culture would not have been born without this shock of silence, of feeling that you cannot write poetry or whatever after big crimes, but then the need to do it. Second, I think when we talk about Arendt, it's a very important figure now for Ukraine. We have with Vakhtang several conversations about her. I think people are too much focused on this banality of evil. Let me remind you that she also talks about the radical evil in her origins of totalitarianism, and the radical evil for her is making people superfluous. And this is the key point, making people replaceable. So evil is when people, all of us, are made replaceable by anybody others. And Eichmann is also possible in the world where he thinks, I will do it because anybody else will do it. And that's the point. Only when we understand our unique position in life, only when we understand that nothing will happen without us, without our engagement and participation, then we have also thinking, then we have action. And I don't think that we can, differentiate here between vita activa and vita speculativa. I think, and this is, by the way, what's Farren's message in Human Condition, that philosophy and thinking is also action and engagement and vita activa. So let's think about it today. What is happening today? I think we're facing replaceability, but this replaceability is not only driven by tyrannies and empires. It's also driven by technology. It's also driven by many other things. But we are also going to the extreme opposition to it, like people's illusion of being irreplaceable. I think social media plays on that. Like, we are all unique, we're all irreplaceable. And I think the truth is that we can only be individuals if true individuals if we want to implement some big value in our life which is bigger than us being an individual. So, and this is where thinking I think starts.
Attacks. Yeah. First of all, I'm absolutely agree with you about this idea that we do need poetry, philosophy, humanity during the war, after after Auschwitz, after Bucha. And yeah, the Ukrainian poetry now is very interesting, and the war is a great impulse for our creative work. And for example, I can tell you one example. Probably there are many of them, but very important example probably for us, the book of our friend, Ukrainian poet Victoria Amelina. She was killed in Kramatorsk, and she started to write poems during the war. And the title of her book, with the poems, with the poetry, this book was published after her death. I would translate it, the title of the book into English like Witness Statements. Witness Statements. So it's very short poems, but she wrote all of them during her experience, during her trips in the deoccupied territories and before her death under the Russian shelling. So, and for all Ukrainian people, and I hope so for all people all over the world, it's a very important document of our time. These witness statements, but like poems. Secondly, about Hannah Arendt, she really did a very important thing in the middle of 20th century, and I would say this notion of banality of evil was very important for all of us, because after a romanticization of evil, she made a great job of deromanticization of evil. She tried to show that evil is not attractive. Evil is terrible and banal. But at the same time, I see it dangerous here, because here I understand that she is deeply rooted in our moral and religion tradition. She grounded, I think, even on the Bible, and our Jewish. It's also the part of Jewish tradition and the part of Christian tradition, and the main idea of our religion and the main idea of our moral philosophy, that evil hasn't ontological meaning, hasn't ontological role. It's not rooted in being. Evil is absence of all the good. Devil is absence of God. There is not evil in this world. But I'm not sure that she is right, and I'm not sure now that our whole tradition is right. Because, for example, when we see the real evil, when we meet the terrible Russian actions in Bucha or in Izum or all over where they are coming, so it's a big question for me. It's a very important question for me. Am I right when I as philosopher say that evil is just absence of good? Do you know the first institution created by Russian when they come? It's a torture camera, and a torture camera, torture chamber, and it's not a secret place, it's not a secret place. Everyone should know where is it, and everyone should know that he or she can be imprisoned and tortured there. So when we hear these stories from all the people on the deoccupied territories, I ask myself, yeah, is really the evil is absence of good in our world? Or we really meet the real evil? You know, and this evil has the name. And for me, this name is Russia.
We have time for one question from the audience. So I don't know if anybody wants to be brave enough to take that one question. Yes, Hans.
I really enjoyed the talk, and thank you so much. I think, like everyone else, this is really impressive and engaging. I want to quibble with one little point. You said that the aphorism goes that good philosophy, bad philosophy gives you answers to every question, and good philosophy gives you questions for all the answers. But I do think just your case illustrates that in some ways this is, I would say, patently not true. Because if you go back to an older tradition of philosophy that looks at wars, a tradition that goes back centuries, that involves St. Augustine, the Thomas tradition that has been developed as a long tradition, it has a crystal clear answer to what happens to Ukraine. That according to old thinking about wars, when there isn't a cause and when there isn't a good intention, as you say, when there isn't restraint, when there isn't legitimacy, we describe these as manifestly unjust wars. And so I just wonder whether on these things we shouldn't be much clearer, because it also clarifies that at key points philosophy can and should be on the right side of history.
Thank you. Like with many people say, the Palestinian situation is complicated. It's not complicated in various ways. The same. Sometimes philosophy has to be direct to it.
I agree with you. I think one of the problems of reacting to many, wars, and when there is a clear distinction between the good and evil, is say, well, it's all relative. We don't know all the truth and blah blah. I don't mean by my formula. I don't mean that relativization of everything. But I mean that maybe I will say the banal things. So the good is also banal sometimes. I would say that we are always confronting a situation where we need to do more. And I will give you one example. I think that without understanding how the tyrants are working with death, for example, and how they use death as a management tool, we won't understand for example, Russian invasion of Ukraine or many other wars. And I'm trying, for example, to reflect upon and to deepen it. And therefore, I'm saying, even if I have a clear answer to this, it doesn't mean that I should stop thinking. That's what I mean.
Finally, you back that. Okay. Very much for your attention and your engagement. Thanks.
Thank you very much.